Before we get started, Talk Music Talk has a newsletter, a weekly email featuring the current week's guests, plus what past guests are up to. Also, I'll tell you about shows I've attended and new music that I like. To sign up, head on over to talkmusictalk.com, click on the link, subscribe to newsletter, and you are all set. That's talkmusictalk.com. And now for today's episode. Hello there. Welcome to another episode of Talk Music Talk with Boys. I am Boys. This is my podcast. Thank you so much for listening to it. Talk Music Talk, for the first-time listener, is a weekly music interview podcast where I have long-form conversations with people who are connected to music from different genres and different backgrounds, musicians, music therapists, music journalists, established, also emerging, people in between. And on this episode, I had the great pleasure of speaking to someone who is a part of hip-hop history, filmmaker and artist, Charlie Ahearn. You probably know him as the director of Wild Style, the seminal narrative movie on graffiti writing that's a part of hip-hop history. But he has done so much more since the 1983 release of Wild Style. He currently has a solo exhibition at P.P.O.W. Gallery here in New York City. It is a 25-year culmination of his art, of everything he does, his greatness, and it is open until June 24th. If you are in New York or planning to travel to New York or need a reason to come to New York, you should absolutely check out his show. Great conversation with him. We talk about his early days in the 70s, his interest in photography. We talk about how he got into filmmaking. We go into his other interests like street culture, hip hop, graffiti, kung fu movies. We talk about Wild Style and the making of it. We go into his many projects, books, slideshows, everything else. And the conversation kicks off discussing his 1978 Super 8 Kung Fu movie, The Deadly Art of Survival. We recorded this at the office, at one of the offices at P.P.O.W. Gallery in Chelsea. So you do have some stray office sounds in the background. Does not take away from a great conversation. Here it is, without further ado, my discussion with Charlie Ahearn on Talk Music Talk. Enjoy.
I had a 16 millimeter Bolex camera, and I was very curious about a housing project that was nearby where I lived by the Brooklyn Bridge, which was the Smith Housing Projects, the Alfred E. Smith Housing Project. And I would wander around there with my Bolex camera with the idea of shooting someone from that area, and then I would come back the following week and project it on a wall of a building.
Okay.
Or show it to them on a projector in their apartment with this idea that it wasn't about making a movie so much, it was about interacting with the community and meeting people in this fashion. It was like an art project.
Okay.
And I began doing things like I was there in the evening one time, and I heard this very loud James Brown music coming from this doorway, and it was like soul power.
Yeah.
And it was like James Brown repeating this thing, and I was just like hypnotized by this music, and I wandered into this gymnasium, and there was along a wall, there was like a graffiti mural along one side of a wall, which it turns out was by Lee Quinones.
Okay.
And the DJ was playing this music in this repetitive, loud fashion, and there were lines of guys facing each other, which all looked very tribal to me in my upstate, white guy like mentality. I thought, what's going on here? And the guys would be in line, and they would drop back onto their heels and kick one leg out in unison. And I was like, I began shooting it with my camera. And then I came back the following week to the next dance that they were having there. And I just set up, and I don't remember ever talking to anybody. I just came and I set up my projector really long, and I just showed the footage big on the wall, and just got reactions from people. And then I put up a flyer that said I was going to show these things in the community center room. And when I was setting up to show the film, these kids started coming into the room, and I was like, well, that's really weird, because usually no one comes when I when I do this. No one responds because people are shy. But this time, all these kids filed into the room, and there was this young man with them, and his name was Nathan, and he was the Sifu of this school, and the school was called the Deadly Art of Survival. Okay. And they said that they wanted to make a movie with me about the school, and I was like, I'm there. Let's begin this weekend, and we'll start making it. And I had just started to work with Super 8, which had a sound stripe on it. And I was really looking for a great project to work with this medium. And it was perfect for what I wanted to do, because I saw that this group was like a performance martial arts school. Like they would, to get attention from the community, they would put on shows which had stories to them. Okay. And the stories would be about resisting the local drug lords, or resisting the gangs in the community. And all this resistance to negativity was a big part of the school, which was also a big part of martial arts movies, if anyone has gone to see martial. And at that time, martial arts movies were shown on 42nd Street. And so I began looking at movies on 42nd Street all the time to see what was the sort of offspring of Bruce Lee, which was a very popular culture in New York, underground in the street. And that became the movie, which was called The Deadly Art of Survival. And I spent a whole year making that movie with these kids. They were kids, and I would put out a pizza on the picnic table, and kids would get and it kept people swarm, and they would want to stick around, and something was going on, and I would work with Nathan, and Nathan was like this incredibly fearless, tough leader, and one of his students happened to be Lee Quinones, but Lee Quinones was a graffiti writer, so that was. Lee Quinones was no longer at his school. Because that was not good. So, and I began to shoot the scenes, and one of the scenes that I shot was in front of Lee Quinones' murals, which were all over the neighborhood, the handball courts. And Lee Quinones had just painted this handball court, which was Howard the Duck. And this is 1978. And while I was shooting this scene, along comes this kid with a big afro, and he was a tall, skinny kid, and he had a motorized bike, and he's putting along towards me, and he stops, and I said, "Did you paint this?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "I want to work with you. I want to work with you in this film. Can we work together?" He said, "Bet." Which meant yes. He said, "Bet." And then I'm like, "So how can I get your contact?" He said, "I'll be around." And then he drove off. And that was my perfect opening meeting with Lee, because Lee is like that.
Okay.
He's just very impossible to contact. And because he was very wanted at that time by the police in New York, because he was painting literally hundreds of whole trains, or whole cars, I should say. And he was very, very active, and he was probably the most known writer, artist on the subway system.
Okay.
And that's the backstory.
Yeah. So I'm curious, when you first went to the projects, what made you go to that project?
Because I lived right next to it. I lived on Fulton Street, which was only like a half a block from. I was right south of the Brooklyn Bridge, and I always thought that south of the Brooklyn Bridge you had this community that was like Southbridge Towers, and it was very like quote middle class. And you walk under the Brooklyn Bridge, and you enter the housing project, and it's definitely. Everything changed culturally about these two areas, that you felt like you went through some kind of gate, and it was ghetto. It was like it had. This is the 70s when the front doors had no locks on them, the elevators didn't work, and they're 12-story buildings. In other words, things were run down in the 70s.
What were you? Did you have any idea what you were looking for with your camera?
It was a feeling that I just wanted to explore and to meet people, and the idea was that this was going to lead to something, and of course it did. It led to me making this martial arts movie, which was beyond my wildest dreams, because it came already packaged with, it had all the cast was in it, and the stories were there. All I had to do was talk to them, and it may seem corny to people, but that's the stories that people told around this kind of genre of kung fu movies and struggle. It was always about a struggle of community struggling to against evil forces.
And what made you attracted to the projects when so many other people would have been scared to even go in that area?
I always liked to be where I didn't belong. Because I'm like that. I was always like that when I was growing up. I have an identical twin brother, and around that time, my twin brother started riding trains into the Bronx and started making casts of people in the Bronx. So we were working different sides of the same fence. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it was just about openness.
And when did the interest in film start?
Oh, that started back in like 1975, which isn't that early, because when I was taking the 16 millimeter movies was 1977.
Okay.
So it's not that, this is a couple years before. And it was really because the art world at that time, the people that I knew, the young people that I knew in the art world, were very against the art world because they thought the art world didn't have a purpose and was just about selling work, and they couldn't sell their work anyway, even if they wanted to. It was cut off from people. And so people were interested in finding new ways to make artwork, like performance and video. And so I thought, well, I'm not a performer, but I can make like films and show them on walls and things like that. So that was the idea, was to try to make a new art world someplace else.
Were you even thinking along the lines, I'm going to be a filmmaker one day, or I'm just creating art in this moment?
I did not think that way. No, I really thought of this as just an exploration.
Okay.
And then in the summer of 1980, the group that I was friends with were all began to make Super 8 films. Like James Nares is a great example. He made a film called Rome 78, which he obviously made in 1978. And it was people were interested in genres, making genre movies. And I made a kung fu movie, and Rome 78 was like a Roman epic with people from the Lower East Side punk movement. And the Bees were making film noirs. This is a kind of genre thing. And then there was this thing called the Times Square Show, which happened in the June of 1980. And it was typical of what we're talking about, this idea of finding a location in the middle of Times Square, which is the least place where you're going to find an art gallery, and creating an art center for 1 month in the middle of Times Square. And trying to draw from all that street culture that's in Times Square, and people came from Brooklyn and from the Bronx and from all over to be part of that thing. And you had people like Jean-Michel Basquiat showed up there, and Keith Haring, but also all these people from Collab that I was friends with, like Tom Otterness and my wife Jane Dixon. My twin brother John showed portrait casts that he had done in the Bronx on a wall, and got on the cover of the Village Voice for this. And it was exclaimed as the watershed of the new 1980s kind of art.
Yeah.
And I think it was, in a way, it was for me anyway, the idea that the street was going to be king and was going to tell people what it was. And you're not going to tell it what it is, but it's going to tell you what it is.
Okay.
And I think that was, you could say it's what hip-hop was, but nobody had a word for it yet.
Yeah.
But it was coming.
Did your interest become in the music from doing the movie, doing the film, doing Wild Style, or had you had some interest in the music?
Like, a lot of things happen completely by you're blindly running into things just because you're in the right place at the right time. And things like there's a thing which was later a theme song that was the B-Boy. I later found out that the B-Boys were really into a particular song. And I went into a little record store, and I said, I'm looking for a record that has like some percussion in the middle of it. Of course, that was like beat music, right? But I didn't know what the name of it was, because I said, I want this. In my mind, I thought, I want to take that little piece and repeat it over a scene, which is what hip-hop was. Yeah. But I didn't know that's what it was called. Okay. And there was a piece of music that was from Jamaica that was being used by B-boys, and I'm trying to think of the name of it right now, and I will think of it. And that piece I play in the movie, but I slow it down. But it is repeated and slowed down, and it plays in a scene. And Apache is the name of the song, and that Apache was huge underground. Yeah. It's just that wasn't known, let's say, to people like myself, or certain DJs would have known about it for years. Yeah. And of course, it was a song from 1972, so it's not. None of this is about newness. It's like hip-hop rediscovered the song. And then repurposed other people it's like this is the way things are, or the way things happen. And there was no media involvement in the culture, in the sense that kids would take cassettes that were made at a party in the Bronx. People would have a box, and they would have two cassettes, and they would make two cassettes and then flip the cassettes. Yeah. And then those cassettes would be flipped and reproduced, and then they would go to Brooklyn and go all over the Lower East Side. In other words, people like Busy Bee or Grandmaster Flash did not have records, but they were known in Brooklyn and known in the Lower East Side. I didn't know them.
Okay.
Do you see what I'm saying? I'm saying that the way that culture spread had its own methods, the other method is by flyers.
Okay.
Which is something I'm very much focusing on in my show, is the way in which flyers were like the dissemination of information, because those flyers spread all over the place, and people would see the flyers, and gradually they would know. So that when Wild Style came out, we imitated that, and I got kids, and I mean high school students, in high schools throughout Queens, Brooklyn, Bronx, on Friday afternoons when kids were getting out of school, there were people hitting flyers, which is what DJ AJ used to do. He was the Russell Simmons of hip-hop in the Bronx before Russell. Okay. And that meant that when Wild Style opened in Times Square, there were lines around the block, and people were like, how do they know about it? They didn't get it from the Village Voice. These are high school students. So it was tapping into something that was a pre-existing, that culture that's already there.
And what was it about the culture that so attracted you to do a film on it?
I just thought that it started really like with recognition of Lee Quinones as a kind of, Lee Quinones was a kind of superhero, super like artist that was working at a level that the art world did not work at. It was much like more, and he was working kind of in a pop art kind of fashion, but very, but it wasn't cool. It was hot, emotional, and informational, poetic. Okay. And he was communicating, as were hundreds of other artists. I don't mean that he was alone, but because I saw his murals on the walls, I began to take an appreciation for this and say, this is an art movement that's going out to thousands of people know about this, and the art world doesn't know about it. So this is really important and interesting. And when I began to work with Fab Five Freddy and go to clubs in the Bronx, there was a sense like the whole of hip hop, as I'm explaining with DJs, with the cassettes, that the whole culture had this feeling to it. That it was very young, like high school kids. That's where it came from, high school kids, not from college kids. They grew up, but it came from high school kids, and it was empowerment. It was self-empowerment. It was people doing for themselves. And that was so powerful as a thing to identify with. And I identified with it. I wanted to be, it's like, hey guys, I want to be up with I want to be on your bus. I want to be part of this, which is why I started doing the slideshow. The slideshow was my way of saying to them, me too. Okay. I can do this too. And they would call me Charlie Video. And it's like, okay, I'm throwing these images up and you guys are superstars. See, you're up on the wall. And everyone's like, they're not worried about who took the slides. Yeah. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about, that's me. I'm big. I'm important. Yeah. Even if they don't have a record contract. But it was hip hop. It was the whole nature of what hip hop was, and that was a powerful thing, was identification. And I think that was the reason why the film took off in places around the world, is that the youth in those places, like kids from Suriname in Amsterdam or Turkish kids in Berlin, they completely got it. identified with it and were. I'm not saying there weren't other kids, but I'm saying that that it crossed over into other areas culturally, and it's because of the way it's looking at culture from the inside out.
Yeah. Were you surprised by that?
No, no, not at all. I thought it was totally on point. I was proud of it more than surprised.
Yeah. And did you meet resistance from the people in the community?
Like when I meant to mention the Suriname kids because when I meant because I took my film, The Deadly Art of Survival, I took to Europe in 1978.
Okay.
And I went around and I started flyering. I was going to have a showing of The Deadly Art of Survival. And someone said, "Oh, you should take that over to that neighborhood where the Suriname kids live over there. Yeah. There's like this, and you got to take a train outside of Amsterdam, and it's this place outside of Amsterdam. Go over there and flyer there and do it." And so I said, "Okay, well, I'm gonna do the film screening there, and put flyers in the neighborhood." And people came, and I mean, a lot of it is posturing on my part, but it's still it's about trying to understand how it can work.
And what was you? I'm sorry.
And so it did. Yeah. It was like, and it was interesting. And so I think even this is before I did the slideshow, and it was before I met Fab Five Freddy at the Times Square show where we talked and started making Wild Style together.
Yeah,
it's 2 years before that. And in a way, it was like in New York, there was nothing like that going on because The Deadly Art of Survival didn't show until 1979. And I would say that the impact was no better than what it was in Amsterdam.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It took, Wild Style was a big impact. I mean, it was lines around the block. It was huge impact and it's because it's a much, much better film. The music is really good, and the characters in it are pretty. I learned how to just lighten up and just let it. It's much funnier, and I think people like the fact that it's not a heavy. It's fun. So I think that was important. And Fred is really funny, and the characters are funny in it. So I thought it made it. Okay for high school kids to be into, even though they had no idea, like, what the hell is this? What is this?
So with Fab, when he brought up the idea to start talking about the film, talk about that. Like, he brought up the idea to you, what he wanted to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like a discussion. It wasn't. It was a discussion, and he the main thing to me was that he was working with Lee Quinones. And I was like, oh, well, you've got to bring Lee here tomorrow morning. That was my first inspiration, was like, let's get started. Let's do a movie with Lee. And I was imagining, okay, it's going to be about this graffiti artist, and it's going to be in this milieu. And I kept thinking, and Fred had already been talking to Glenn O'Brien about a film that they were going to make, which was going to be called Street Beat, which was later called Downtown 81.
Okay.
And it was set downtown, and it was set in the music thing. But that was part of the genre idea, like the way James Nears did a genre idea. So, and I really wanted to have it set in the Bronx. That was the main thing, was like, I'm not going to have it down. No, it's not going to be downtown. It's just, there's no, even though Lee is right here, it would be natural to have Lee, the center, and have it downtown. But I was like, no, it's not here. It's so obviously there.
That's where
and if we're going to do that, means we have to rip the shreds out of all the actuality of it. Just rip it and then reform it the way we, what's natural to reform. So it's obviously not a documentary.
No, it feels like
it does, and I like that, and and I feel like it's more real than a documentary. In many ways, it's more real. And people don't understand that because they're not film students. But I understand it because I'm a film student.
Okay.
And like film is not a... Documentary is a form. It's a film form with language. This is not that. This has no interviews except a fake interview. So it's about being as close to the subject as you possibly can be, and not having a bunch of dialogue between you and the subject. Just let the subject appear and do what they do, and then go to the next scene.
Okay.
That was the idea of the film.
And where did you learn that?
I think it was instinct. It was like all those times showing people the deadly art of survival and going, oh my God, there's so much plot in this movie. You don't need any plot. You should have more of the people just being themselves and cut out all that plot. And so when I made the film, I just said, no. And I actually, when I made the first version of Wild Style, it was like 3.5 hours long. So it was just like, no. We're just going to have it's just light. It's going to be just the people performing. And I think since then, that's been my attitude about all filmmaking. It's like, filmmaking is a performative art for me. And you see in all the films that are here in this gallery, they're all performative. They're all about performance and being as close to, but they're not documentary films.
Okay.
I have made documentaries. Like I made a documentary called Jamel Shabazz, Street Photographer. And that was because the subject didn't lend itself to a performative film. Because it was about a photographer, and the subject of the photographers they were not performers. They were people that lived their lives. So I wanted that to be the subject of the film. People talking about themselves, living their life, and it's certainly not a real documentary. It's not a classic documentary. It's my own idea of it. But that's the only one that I've really made. The other films are more performative.
And how did you did you have any ideas for your career after Wild Style, or you were just things would come along?
I naturally thought, in my mind, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to combine, because originally when I made Wild Style, one of the opening scenes was going to be a kung fu scene, and I always wanted to combine martial arts with hip-hop. And so I thought the next film is going to be a combination of martial arts and hip-hop. It's like what Wu-Tang did like 15 years later. I wanted to do right in 1985. And I started writing. I had a number of script ideas. I had one that was going to take place in the future, that was going to be in a post-industrial society outside of way in Pennsylvania, and I had another one that was set in the Southeast Asia, and it had a guy named the Monkey Boy was going to be the lead character because he's a Chinese legend. The Monkey King is the Chinese. All stories in Kung Fu lead back to the Monkey King, and I'm very involved in the Mad Monkey Kung Fu movie, which is one of my favorites.
And what is it about martial arts and Kung Fu that you love?
It's a spiritual expression, and I felt that it was the ultimate art form. It's an expression of ballet and violence and emotion in one moment in time. And there are so many countless Kung Fu movies, and I call them Kung Fu movies, Kung Fu flicks. There are so many Kung Fu flicks that have a great richness of combinations of balletic movement mixed, with wushu, and I always thought that they need to be musicals. That I wanted to make a Kung Fu hip-hop musical. So they were all going to have songs in them, and it sounds good, and it is good. But for whatever reason, it seemed it somehow it didn't make sense, because what I had done up to that point was so absolutely rooted in someone else, like a real person. Mm-hmm. So to make something from scratch meant like writing scripts and applying for money and trying to get. And that wasn't really my way of filmmaking. And it took me years of different ways. I wrote probably 6 different hip-hop scripts, one called Queens, set in Queens with female rappers. Okay. And there were a number of scripts that I pursued. One of the ones that I really wanted to do was called Powwow, and it was set in a Boy Scout camp with these rebel kids that start a junkyard band out in the dump outside a Boy Scout camp. And I was working with the real junkyard band from Washington, D.C., and it was going to combine the music of New Orleans with the junkyard music, which was a kind of a go-go funk music played on buckets. Okay. And it was a youth group. It was, these kids were like 13, 14. They were picked up by Russell Simmons' company. They put out a song called Sardines. And I was in love with those kids, and I thought that was going to make a great movie. All filmmakers have these stories. Even great filmmakers have these stories. But the thing is that I did make films, but I didn't make a hip-hop film. And then I came up with this idea, which became my grand idea, which was, because people were always saying, why don't you make Wild Style 2? And I was like, you are so wrong. Yeah. It's such the wrong, for me, it's such the wrong idea. So I came up with this idea, which was originally called the Monkey Boy, which is the same character again, but he was going to be set in 1976 in the Bronx in a home shelter. Home shelter for boys, which I knew the home shelter in the Bronx, and it's set of real people that I knew in the Bronx. Yeah. And it's set in 1976. I was making this in the early 90s. I started going around to people, and I interviewed 40 people. And they were the creme de la creme of the originators of hip-hop. And I would sit in cars after like 2 o'clock in the morning in the back seat of someone's car with a little handset. And I would say to them, what was the first time you experienced hip-hop? Yeah. Where was it? Who was in the room at that time? Were there any lights in the room? What kind of music were they playing? Name a piece of music that you heard. Were people dancing? And I interviewed Grandmaster Caz, Tony Tone, Charlie Chase, down the line, B-boys, DJs. And then that became like more and more. I was just becoming like the only person that was asking these questions. And this is like, I think in the early 90s. And what set it off was in 1989, Cowboy died. And he had been, he was the main MC of the Furious Five. And Cowboy died after having spent 4 years in and out of prison as a crack addict, lying on the streets of New York. And his death and his ending I saw as like the whole generation just grinding into this miserable place. Even Flash was a crack addict. It's like this terrible place that hip-hop went to, in prison or dead. And I just said, well, you know, and I wanted to write an article about him, so I called up Melly Mel and different people. And I was just stoned by what they were telling me, because it was just new to me. And I realized nobody knows this at all. So I started gathering this stuff with the idea of making a movie that would be telling this story. And then that led later to being at the Experience Music Project and talking to the guy that was at the Experience Music Project, and I wanted to see what he had in his flyer collection, and I brought all my flyers, and I brought my photographs, and I said, see, this flyer, this is a photograph of that place, and this story that I have tells what happened in that place. I said, let's make a book that has like the flyer, the picture, and the story, and I think I said, let's call it Legends of Hip Hop at first, because I thought of it as not real. Legends are a kind of myth.
Okay.
And because I'm not interested in like necessarily the whole thing, which sounds like they get down right, but I was a different kind of legend. What I was after, it wasn't my legend; it was their legend. Okay. And then I called up. We started making a book together, and at the Experience Music Project, and I called up Grandmaster Kaz, and I said, Kaz, if you were going to write a book about what happened with hip hop and where it all came from, what would you call the book? He goes, Yes, Yes, Y'all. I said, God, you're right. You're right. I don't know why I didn't think of that.
Yeah.
I never had a decent idea, but at least I know people that do.
Yeah.
And so
you execute.
Yes.
Yes, execution.
So yes, y'all has been my theme ever since. If anyone ever says anything to me, I'm like, yes, y'all. It's like I understand why that it's an expression that comes from the South, and it's about all that culture that came up from the South and ended up in the Bronx, or came from everywhere, from Jamaica, Trinidad, and ends up. Yes, y'all. Yeah. It's all that stuff. So, at least there was a book, right?
Yeah,
the book came, and then
we
showed, and I had a touring photo collection from the book that were largely my photographs. There were a few photographs of Joey Conzo and some others, but really no one had there wasn't a lot out there, and it was the only thing that was the voice of what it was, because it was all in. I never wanted to tell the story myself. It's all just their voices.
Why do you think more people haven't chronicled the period like you did?
Well, there's different ways. Jeff Chang wrote a book which is more editorial and more him bringing stories together. And then there's like The Get Down, which is a fantasy trip. It's way too violent. So wrong.
Yeah.
So wrong. Anyway, don't get me started. Let's talk about good things.
Well, let's talk about the exhibition, your current exhibition.
Yeah. So the thing is that the exhibition is hinged on a couple of basic things. The slideshow is called the Scratch Slideshow. Okay. The exhibition is Scratch Ecstasy, but the slideshow is the Scratch Slideshow. And it was something that for years and years, my photographs, first of all, went up to Cornell, and I couldn't look at them. It was just so hard. I felt more and more like all this stuff is just dispersed.
Because you gave your art, donated your archive.
Yeah, I sold it to them.
Okay.
And so the idea was to try to pull it in and bring it together and make meaning out of it, and not have it just sitting in a box someplace far, far away. And I wanted to find a way to bring meaning to it. And as I saw it, because I had done these slideshows in the Ecstasy garage, for many, many slideshows. And later I did a slideshow with Nan Golden and Jack Smith downtown. In other words, it was a form that I really identified with. It was the cheapest way to make something, except if you just do your own performance.
Okay.
And it became like it took a year of bringing these images from Cornell and then bringing them into a place where I could begin to see what they were. Like not a few of them, not like 16 or 20. I want to look at 900 of them.
Yeah.
I want to see all of them and just begin to go, oh my God, look at this. I forgot about this. And so it was identifying them and putting them into some kind of order. And they were all completely without order, which is not the way they used to be. But in this form, and it was about ordering them in a way that brings people on a journey. I want to welcome you to the Ecstasy Garage, and it's the summer of 1980, and you're going to come into the Ecstasy Garage, and I'm not going to be there. You're just going to meet these people because they are there, and you're going to see the slideshow, and you're going to meet the Cold Crush Brothers, or the Fantastic, and then we're going to take trips out into the surrounding neighborhood to see what it looks like and come back to the Ecstasy Garage again. And then we're going to go out along, we're going to, there was this song by Booker T that I just loved. And I'm like, okay, I'm on a train. I'm on a train with this roll. We're on a roll with the drumming and the Booker T with the organ and all of that feeling, and the whole thing was about the depth of musical tradition. Of these people are people that did music that draws music from the deepest sources of black culture, and call it hip hop if you want. But it was played at the Ecstasy Garage, and I remember those sounds, and so you can see that people are on the microphone, but you don't hear them because I'm not involved in the moment because the slides are changing every 4 seconds. I'm not involved in that. I'm in another time and space. And we're creating 3 spaces for the viewer. And one of them is the space of the music, which is a space of great feeling. And it's the space of archiving the music that people listen to. Not the only stuff, but that's what I want us to listen to, because I want us to go on a journey of feeling. And what Grand Wizard Theodore was playing, and these are all songs that he played at the Ecstasy Garage. And so these images take us on a journey of a kind of local club that nobody ever went. Russell Simmons never went in there. It wasn't the Disco Fever, where people were, totally snorting lines of coke around the bar. It was like that was the big boys club. This was like the high school kids. And I totally identified with that and said, okay, this is my spot. I'm going to get into this. And I felt very relaxed there. And then we go to other clubs like the T Connection, where Cool Herc used to perform there. And we go to other clubs, the Outdoor Jam in the Bronx, or all these different jams. But also we go downtown and we see Lee Quinones's abandoned building, which has a huge hole in the roof where the sunlight is coming in, and that's where he's painting his pictures. And it's definitely where he played as a kid, because this is right next to where he grew up. So we're going to meet all these people and the Times Square show and all this stuff that's going on. And I always, going back to to the deadly art of survival, one of my favorite things that I used to do then was create posters for my movies. And I always thought when I was making those things that I was playing with Andy Warhol. I was like doing photo silkscreen where you paint an image and then you put black over it. And it creates this kind of gnarly 70s looking poster image. And I wanted to do that. I'm like, I can do that. I know how to do that. And we have all these images. What is really interesting from these images that I can make something that will cause people to look back at this? Because an art piece is like a distillation, right? It's a distillation. So like you choose one image and then you say, that's the image that we're going to look at. Why? I don't know. Is it because it's in focus?
Yeah.
You know, and I didn't always pick the pictures that were in focus, and I didn't pick the best pictures, but I picked the pictures that could work. And, you know, the slideshow was always about, I had all these pictures that were out of focus, or like they'd come, and I'd go, oh my God, I like that guy, but it's so dark. So I'd scratch a word, like rock on, even though the busy image is like in darkness. Where's the people? And or like another image with the cold crush was like way it was too bright. So I took markers and wrote cold crush on them and write outlines. So I go, okay, now it's art. Because if it's no good, then you can make art out of it. Whereas if it's a perfect picture, you don't need to make art out of it. It's already art. So I like the idea that it was the crummy pieces. I thought, I identify with this, and I think that I identify this in terms of the Bronx and in terms of hip-hop. It's like taking the part that people throw away, that no one values, and I'm going to take that part and make something out of it. I don't know if people like it, but what the hell? Just like, so that was the idea of the paintings, was like, I don't care what people think of this stuff. If I can make, you know, and I started thinking them as genres, like, okay, there's going to be a flyer genre, and then I'm going to do a poster genre, and then I thought, I'll do a map genre too, because I made a map for my original Yes, Yes, Y'all book. And for some reason, they decided not to print it in the book, and then it was printed in Joe Conzo's book. But it was very crude, and I took it, and I started doing things with the silkscreen images, and I made it into something new out of it. But it's the information and the feeling of it mixed with the map, see? So then the colors and everything makes it into something new.
And how many images from the 900, what did you whittle it down to?
Well, the slideshow is 300.
Okay.
And then you might say there's like 10 images in this show.
Yeah.
And out of the images in the show, I would say there's at least 3 or 4 that are combining lots of images. And I want to do more of that, because I don't really look at it as a photograph. I look at it as information.
And what would you like people to walk away from seeing the show? Or did you have an intention?
Well, I was surprised when I put the show together, because I wasn't actually, of course I was worried about the slideshow. Right up until the end, I was getting it better and better. And I was worried about whether I had paintings to show here. And then when we put the show together, I was surprised at how important the video was in the show. And I really, I thought, yeah, these are really hardcore. These videos are hardcore. I'm so glad I have this, because this is a dimension that really works with this, to me, works with the other work. So that was what I came away, was thinking, okay, the videos are strong here. And that's a whole nother discussion, talking about all those videos and what they mean. Because each video would take a year to do, and there are they're very simple. They're all about a single piece of time. Each video represents a single hour of time. But to make that video might take a lot of going in, a lot of stuff has to go in to make that piece of time. And then afterwards, to edit it so that it looks and is complete would take a long time. But it's about performance, and it's about that moment in time. So that's all I have to say.
And finally, what does the show say about you?
I identify with all this stuff. And, you know, when I look at the movie Wild Style, someone said to me last night at the screening, they said, "Oh, so do you identify with Patty, right? That's that's you, right?"
Yeah.
And I didn't say it to the audience, and I thought, no, actually, I look at Lee and I totally identify with that character. And it's a complicated thing, but I do. I identify with that character, and not that I'm a great artist the way Lee was, but his feelings in it, I identify with it. And when I look at this, you know, there's an aspect where, you know, you can be the most polite person in the world, but you really want to kick the door down.
Yeah.
That's me.
Okay. That's a lot of people.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. This was wonderful, Charlie. I
Thank
appreciate you doing this.
All right.
Charlie Ahearn here on Talk Music Talk. I had a wonderful time talking to Charlie. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, his exhibition, his solo exhibition at P.P.O.W. Gallery. They have a website, so you should check it out. ppowgallery.com. The show is until June 24th. And also check out Charlie's personal website, charlieahearn.com, CharlieAhearn.com. And of course, I will put that all in the show notes. I have a few websites myself. I have talkmusictalk.com for more podcast information. I have my own personal website, which is thisisboys.com. You can read excerpts from the novels that I write and also check out the music that I make. And I am on Instagram at thisisboyce, THISISBOICE. I don't know why I spelled this and is for you. I have a call to action for you. There is a TMT, Talk Music Talk app. That's right. Every single episode, it is free for iPhone and Android, wherever you like to get your apps, or you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play or just about everywhere else. And if you are listening on iTunes, please do me a big favor and leave a rating and or review to help spread the word about the podcast. And you can also find the show on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/thisisboyce. And I will not spell this is again for you. This starts with episode 100 on SoundCloud, episode 100 with Carlos D from Interpol, former bassist of Interpol, Carlos Dangler. And plus you can hear my music at that link. That is soundcloud.com/thisisboyce. And I have 2 back catalog suggestions for you once you download the app or subscribe to the podcast. Keeping in line with hip-hop history, 2 episodes. Episode number 33, Ricky Powell, street photographer, chronicled the 80s hip-hop scene like the Beastie Boys and Run DMC. Great conversation with him. And also episode number 40 with Joe Buck, painter, illustrator, graphic designer. He illustrated the 1991 De La Soul is Dead album cover. That's episode number 40 with Joe Buck. I will put the links to both of those episodes in the show notes so you can check them out also. Thank you so much for listening to Charlie Ahearn, The Conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, and there will be a next time, this one's for you, Liz.